Last week, Mark introduced the new teaching series that we are exploring together this term, The Way Love Works, in which he sang us some Tina Turner lyrics, which is strange because Mark has often reminded me of Tina Turner. I think it's the hair. He shared 3 reasons why love matters. It's who God is, it's our calling as God's family, and it's how others will know what God is like. So this week we're beginning to look together at one of the most famous passages about love in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13. When I was growing up, I was a choir boy, because nothing builds your confidence and street cred more than donning a surplice and a cassock every weekend. But one of the perks of being a choir boy was that you were paid if you did weddings on a Saturday. It was £1 a wedding, and sometimes there were even 3 weddings on one day, so £3. The earnings were distributed at the end by a choir master, like a slightly disappointing Father Christmas. But the byproduct of this was that I sat through an inordinate number of weddings, and most of them would have heard this famous passage from 1 Corinthians 13 read out. And I think it's a credit to this passage that, despite having heard it more times than I can count, I still think it's one of the most beautiful things that has ever been written down. It's so beautiful and so rich that I could spend most of this whole talk just discussing 6 words from the whole passage. Before we get into those 6 words, though, let's put them in context. This famous piece of writing is written by a man called Paul. And at the beginning of this passage, Paul not only declares love to be important, but says that without love, we are nothing. If I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. That's quite a claim. Paul lists amazing things that we can do through faith. Speak in other languages, share prophecies, understand the mysteries and secret knowledge of the universe, move mountains. But he says that all of them are essentially meaningless without love. It is love that makes every other action of faith mean something. Why is love so important? Well, the Bible tells us that God is love. That is the very essence of who he is. A minister at a church I used to go to was fond of saying, "Prick me, I bleed. Prick God, he loves." And if being a follower of Jesus means becoming more like him, then we cannot do that without becoming more loving human beings. Love should be at the heart of everything that we do. And it's worth remembering at this point that these beautiful words about love were written by a man who had been instrumental in persecuting and killing Christians before he experienced the amazing love and grace that changed him forever. We're not talking about some soft greeting card version of love. Paul's not being sentimental. He fully understands the life-changing nature of God's love. Love that is fierce and alive and transformative. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be taking 1 Corinthians 13 piece by piece and breaking down the ways in which Paul defines love and its nature. Which brings me back to these 6 words that I mentioned earlier. The 6 words from this passage that we're going to focus on today. Love is patient. Love is kind. 6 simple words, but words that, if we could truly grasp and act on their significance, would change us and society from top to bottom. Nikki Gumbel, who developed the Alpha course, shared a helpful and challenging thought about this passage. How would this passage read if we were to substitute our name for love throughout verses 4 to 6? How many of these characteristics of love could we claim about ourselves? Darren is patient. Darren is kind. Are those honestly ways in which I could describe my own character? The answer, truthfully, is at best, sometimes. I'm generally a patient person, and I hope that I treat others with kindness. But there are times when I get impatient over trivial things just because things don't quite pan out the way I want them to. Sometimes I'm too quick with a sharp comeback just because I'm going for a cheap laugh. I'm a work in progress, basically. And that's why it's worth taking the time to look again together at these simple but powerful words and explore how we can apply them to our lives. Let's take the first part. Love is patient. We live in a culture of the now. If I order something on Amazon, I can have it delivered even that same day sometimes. I used to like going to Blockbuster Video on a Friday or Saturday night. If you don't know what that is, kids, you can ask your parents. And that was to go and choose a movie, to look at the shelves and pick what film you're going to watch that night. Now I can instantly select something on Netflix and it plays straight away. A book can appear on my Kindle in seconds. So many things meet that desire that we have for a quick fix. But love is not something that can be rushed. There's nothing that can speed it along or make it instantaneous. Relationships are slow and sometimes messy. Love takes its time. And the relationships we're in require patience, whether they are relationships between parents and children, between husband and wives, friends. If you've ever been on the receiving end of someone's patience, you'll know what a blessing it can be. I remember how patient my wife Chris was when I was dragging my feet about having children. I was convinced I wasn't ready. Having two wonderful daughters now, I don't know what I was so worried about, but Chris put up with all my procrastination and blessed me by doing so. And when you read the Gospels and look at the relationship between Jesus and his disciples, you appreciate the level of patience that Jesus had with them. They saw so many miracles, heard so much amazing teaching straight from the mouth of God, and yet they still messed up, spoke out of turn, abandoned him when things got tough. And yet he demonstrated his love for them through his patient perseverance. He never gave up on them. The final words of the Gospel of Matthew are Jesus telling his disciples, "Surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." And I sometimes wonder why God doesn't just give up on me, and yet he never does. And I wonder when I look at the state of the world sometimes, how doesn't God just throw his hands in the air and start a new planet somewhere else? And yet he doesn't. His love is endlessly patient. Like the father in the parable of the prodigal son, he waits with arms open wide, ready to pick us up again and welcome us home. And we're living through a time, aren't we, that's testing our patience. It's important that we don't allow these external challenges to make us impatient with others, that we don't take our frustration out on those around us. Sadly, that can often be the people that are most dear to us. Love is patient. And the next three words, love is kind. There have been so many touching stories, haven't there, of acts of kindness that people have done over the last year during this challenging time. The people who take food to the hungry, the medical teams that work tirelessly to get patients through this pandemic, the gifts and time given to people who are living alone, for whom one small act of kindness may completely change the nature of another gloomy day. We all want to be treated with kindness. It's too easy sometimes to share a cruel word rather than a kind one, to be cynical rather than think the best of people. Look at the state of politics in recent years. How much could that be transformed by more kindness at every level? I was touched by an unexpected small act of kindness recently. The Department for Education had asked parents to send any complaints about online teaching to Ofsted so they could address any issues. However, instead of receiving hundreds of complaints about schools and teachers, instead Ofsted were flooded with emails praising school and teachers for their hard work, and that was across the country. As a teacher myself, I was genuinely touched by that wave of kindness from something that had initially appeared to invite criticism. Love is patient. Love is kind. 6 words, but even they are enough to challenge us for the rest of our lives. Thank goodness that God is gracious to us. Thank goodness that his patience allows us to ask and receive his forgiveness when we mess up, when we are the very opposite of what Paul is describing. And we need to remember that we're not asked to do this in our own strength. When we follow Jesus, he promises that we live in him and he lives in us. In other words, the most perfect, loving person to ever walk on this earth promises to be with us and help us in those areas where we need more patience, to help us treat even the people we find hard to love with kindness. And so I challenge all of us this week and in the coming days and coming months, where are those areas of our lives where we could demonstrate more patience in all the relationships that we're part of? When do we need to take a breath and see others as God sees them, through eyes of love, not eyes of frustration or eyes of disappointment? And what about those ways in which we could exhibit kindness to others, affirming or encouraging someone, contacting that person that we've been meaning to call, listening to someone who has only had their own 4 walls to talk to this week? Love is patient. Love is kind. 6 simple words that could change everything if we let them.